We go now to Ohio Congressman Mike Turner. He is expected to head up the House Intelligence Committee. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret. Thank you for having me.
So we have this development in regard to the further materials that were found at President Biden's Delaware home. What is your reaction, and what does it signify to you that no one realized that this classified material was missing, some of it dating back to his Senate years?
This is really incredible. And as you know, congratulations to you. We would not know anything about this if it hadn't been that CBS had broken this story. The White House nor the Department of Justice had shared any of the information with the public. And this really is one matter. We wouldn't have this issue if it hadn't been for Biden's Attorney General making the decision to raid former President Trump's house looking for classified documents that were being held there. What's amazing about all this is it takes us to the question of why were these documents here? Well, now that we learn that some of these go back to his Senate time, clearly he's become a serial classified document hoarder. Why did he have these? Who did he show them to? I mean, the only reason you can think of as to why anyone would take classified documents out of a classified space and home is to show them to somebody. Who did he show them to? This is going to be crucial, I think, to the special counsel's investigation. Is why did the president have these documents? Who did he show them to him? And is it connected to the Biden family businesses?
Well, you know the differences, of course, too. I want to talk about the Biden situation, but just to clarify, when you reference President Trump, there were 300 classified documents. There was a warrant. There was refusal to comply in terms of handing things over. And the White House and the president's lawyer are pointing out that in the case of Biden, he granted permission, and this was consensual for the DOJ to come in and search. Does the fact that the Justice Department conducted the search signify anything more to you, and do you have any insight into the sensitivity of the documents?
Sure, absolutely. I think this looks more like a cover-up than an investigation. Attorney General Garland had appointed a special counsel because he had determined that he could no longer he's not independent in this investigation, and he was biased, and therefore you appoint a special counsel because the Attorney General was unable to continue the investigation.
He said it was in the public interest.
But the determination of appointing a special counsel is that the Attorney General is no longer able to operate independently and has a bias which would affect his ability to conduct the investigation. In this instance, then, he's appointed a special counsel, but yet he's continuing the investigation. Why isn't he waiting and turning this over to the special counsel? And with respect to, this being one matter, I mean, you have to take this in context that Biden's Attorney General was on his way to the Supreme Court until he was derailed by Trump's election. Then you have that Trump is Biden's political rival and obviously his opponent. And they'd make the decision to raid his home. Now, there were many, many other options that were available to them, including going to enforce the subpoena in court. But instead, they raided his home. So what they had to do now was to go into Biden's home. But again, they're not the same. They went in with his counsel. They barred Trump's counsel. The Attorney General's directing this. The Attorney General had already determined he needed a special counsel. There's a number of inconsistencies here. But in the end, what a terrible political miscalculation that this has been from the Biden administration. They thought they had Donald Trump, but in the end, they've exposed their own president, their own Biden administration head, Joe Biden, as being a serial classified document hoarder. That's an amazing development.
Do you have any facts to back up your allegations that he was hoarding things in terms of intention to take classified material versus it's been characterized that it was somehow accidental? Do you have any insight into what these materials were?
Well, they didn't fly to his home without him. They went on a train with him from his Senate offices and then in boxes that he was in charge of. The chain of custody here is going to be important because we know that these were in Joe Biden's hands and Joe Biden's control. And then it ended up behind his Corvette in his garage and in his office that he did not control, and also throughout his house. And so the special counsel is going to have to deal with the issue of what was the chain of custody, who had these, why did he take them to begin with, when did he get them?
Yeah.
When was he handed these documents, and what did he do with them? And this is a real critical question to all this. Why did he have these documents to begin with? And that is why the special counsel's work is going to be really important, because I can think of no reason why the president should have taken home as a senator or as vice president any classified documents that clearly have no protection. They're available and open to anybody.
Yeah, and just one quick point there. The U.S. Attorney in Chicago was a Trump appointee. I know you have questions about the actions here, but you do know that, right? the person
Right,
who
and
is
he's not
overseeing this?
acting, and he's not acting independently. That's why the Attorney General appointed a special counsel who would be independent.
Right, who's about to start shortly. You are
who has not yet.
Right. You have also, before this development, asked for a briefing from the Director of National Intelligence. You said a deadline of Thursday. Do you have any further reason to believe they will meet that deadline, that you will get any insight into these materials?
We'll have to see. But what's critical here, and this is very important, this is what's very important to all of this, Margaret, and that is the FBI and the National Archivists were working completely independent of the intelligence community or the Department of Defense. They claim this was all an issue of national security, but they did not speak to anyone who's involved in national security.
So no response yet from the intelligence community?
I have not received a response. No.
Okay. I also want to ask you about another developing story. Speaker McCarthy tweeted Friday that he has accepted President Biden's invitation to sit down and discuss what he called a responsible debt ceiling increase. Do you know when they will meet, and do you have any insight into a kind of deal that you would support if it would separate out the debt ceiling from this argument over future spending?
Yeah, no, this is very curious on the part of the administration, because 3 weeks ago, with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, President Biden could have raised the national debt limit, but chose not to, waiting until the Republicans took control of the House, knowing that it would result in negotiations over spending. The American public understand that the out-of-control inflation is a result of out-of-control spending in Washington, and there would have to be concessions on spending. That's going to be an ongoing negotiation and discussion, but President Biden chose that path as opposed to just raising the debt ceiling 3 weeks ago. Suddenly, it's now an emergency, and he's calling people to the table to negotiate.
But do you know when those conversations will happen between Speaker McCarthy and the president, and what your party, which is now in leadership, is willing to do?
No, I have no idea what the time frame is. Obviously, the president didn't think it was an emergency 3 weeks ago, and we'll have to see what time frame that he moves at.
Well, you also know that the Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell said you had until June, so it wasn't just a Democratic point of view on the debt ceiling. But it is your party that has talked about using the debt ceiling as leverage. So it is your party's decision to also engage on this issue, arguing that it needs to be sort of made the most of politically. So do you know?
Well, it's not just an issue of leverage. I mean, the debt ceiling is absolutely related to spending. I mean, it's like when a family goes and gets a credit card and they look at what their limit is.
Right.
The limit on the credit card
future
is based
spending
upon
is different.
spending. Is based upon spending that is going to occur. And this is the appropriate time to have that discussion. When you look at what your spending limit's going to be, you need to talk about spending.
Okay. So that's future spending you still think needs to be linked to this conversation when it happens.
Well, and the president knew absolutely and clearly that that was the negotiation point. And when he chose not to raise the debt limit 3 weeks ago and to enter in negotiations with the Republican-controlled House. The American public want spending under control, and that's what these negotiations are going to be about.
Okay. So on the point about spending cuts, under the agreement that Speaker McCarthy brokered in order to win the speakership, the House Budget Committee has to produce a resolution that balances the budget in about 10 years. And if you do that math, resetting fiscal 2024 spending to 2022 levels, that would mean a $75 billion cut to military spending. Is that a red line for you? Are you on board with that?
No, and I think that the negotiations obviously are going to have to be ongoing. But as you just said, the goal has to be to balance the budget. I mean, the American public want the budget balance. They realize that you cannot continue this out of control spending or you will bankrupt our country. This is a path that the American public want. We need it. It's going to be obviously negotiations as to, how do we balance things here and there. But those are going to be ongoing. And the president obviously chose this path. So hopefully this is going to be a fruitful bipartisan, bicameral process.
Okay, well, we're going to be having to talk about this for weeks and weeks in terms of what the substance for that future spending cut is. So that sounds like you're opposed to that one proposal within your party. I also want to ask you what leadership looks like with Republicans in charge. You are also on House Oversight.
Correct.
Of the 26 Republican members on the committee, 19 of them denied the results of the 2020 election. Your colleagues now include Marjorie Taylor Greene, Paul Gosar, Andy Biggs, Lauren Boebert, Scott Perry. They all played critical roles in the former president's attempts to overturn the 2020 election results. Do you have any concerns about working with these lawmakers? I mean, you're very much a centrist.
Well, you know, even on the Democrat side, there's been a number of people who objected to President Bush's reelection and voted against certifying his election.
I'm asking
There's a
about
long
you,
history
your
among
party,
both
and your
sides.
colleagues.
There's a long history of both sides having raised issues, including, you'll recall, the Al Gore taking President Bush's
You're not an election
all the way to
denier by
Supreme
CBS
Court.
standards, just to be clear.
I am not, and I work with both sides of the aisle, and there are election deniers on both sides of the aisle.
You are comfortable with all those individuals I just rattled off and the fact that the majority of the Republicans on this committee denied election results? Is that what you're saying?
What I'm comfortable with is the electorate are very smart. And these people have been sent to Congress to represent their districts and to be part of the congressional debate to lead us to what's going to be bipartisan, bicameral resolutions. We have a split government right now. Republicans control the House. The Senate is controlled by the Democrats. You have a Democrat president. We're going to have a lot of debate and discussions. And I think this is going to be a very fruitful period for Congress and for our country, because it's going to have to be bipartisan, bicameral. And I believe that the president, in opening negotiations with the Republicans, is beginning to start that process.
What is actually possible in this bipartisan, bicameral situation? What can you actually get legislation through?
Depending on what the president's willing to do, I think it's unlimited, right? We have really tough issues right now. We have out of control inflation. We have an open border and record people crossing our border.
What about gun control?
We have the issue of Russia and certainly in Ukraine and certainly China. I think we're going to have a number of issues that we're going to have to deal with.
All right, Congressman Turner, we will be continuing to talk about all these issues. We'd love to talk to you again about Russia and Ukraine, but we have to leave it there today.
Thank you, Margaret.